Magandang umaga po sa kanilang lahat. I am Dina Ocampo from the UP College of Education and the Education Research Program here at the UP Center for Integrative and Development Studies. I would like to thank colleagues from the Higher Ed program for inviting us to participate in this forum. Indeed, it is a very important forum and we need to discuss the issues that are being raised. For example, the nature of higher ed, what is learning going to be like in the next normal, and of course, at this particular juncture, we talk about continuity from basic to higher education. For today's talk, our outline will be as follows. First, we'll just clear some things, level off with a few definitions, and then I'll discuss a few obstacles and disruptors that has threatened or breached continuity. And then we talk about the gaps that we have observed. And finally, maybe we can discuss a few policies and programs that can bridge continuity from basic to higher education. The definitions that we will level off on are just a couple, but these two definitions or this definition is important because it is the center of this discussion. No? For example, a lot of us think about continuity in terms of time, that it is something that happens over a long period of time, and indeed that is a section or a part of the definition. But I think the more important part of the definition of continuity is that it is an unbroken and consistent operation of a process. So that part of the definition, I think, is very, very crucial because one, it means that we are thinking about continuity as a process being carried over through an operation, a procedure that must happen consistently. And because it must happen consistently, we assume that it happens over a period of time. This now connotes a path from one point to the other, from the origin to a destination. There is this path. And this path is very important for us to imagine. This path is, for example, from kinder to grade 1 or a path from kinder to grade 6. This path also means that we are assuming certain qualities, that there are reasons why we stay on this path, that this path is worth our time. And so there must be built-in tools and processes that are used to maintain a desired outcome or to attain a target. And finally, continuity increases the likelihood for similar results and outcomes to be attained again or awarded again. This is why, for example, in certain school settings or educational systems, they're very protective of their tradition or very protective of their technologies because they have proven these traditions or technologies to work towards the outcomes that they desire. And participants in these systems value those targets or value those outcomes so that they stay within these systems. Continuity in education and learning is essentially, from a systems point of view, program implementation and access to programs. I think that if program implementation is continuous, then there is likelihood that the objectives of that program will be met by participants or students. If there is continuity of access to the programs, then that means one, more people can participate perhaps, or two, more students are able to avail of the benefits of these programs. Three, the right individuals have access to these programs. And I think these are important points to remember. The reason being, we want people to be in the appropriate program relevant to their needs, their age, their developmental level, and of course, their aspirations. We will also talk about a few obstacles and disruptors. And these are past and present challenges as far as I am concerned. So let's look at the first set. This set of obstacles and disruptors I've put together because some of them, they have been there for a very long time. Poverty, social injustice, and inequality has been an obstacle to attaining program benefits, to implementing programs, to getting access to programs for decades. And this has been a challenge to everyone in the education sector, whether in government or outside government. It's also very important to remember that poverty is not just affecting the participation of students in school. It also affects their preparation for school. Another important point that we must remember that causes disruption, which is a disruptor, is conflict and war. Anything that threatens the safety of children is something to be very worried about. Natural calamities and disasters are definitely one of the main causes of educational disruption. And another one is urbanization. This might seem a bit strange, but the more quickly a place urbanizes, then the more the need for education in a particular place changes. So that if a place is urbanizing very quickly and the educational system is not changing as fast, or is not producing the graduates that are needed for that change in the city, then that becomes an obstacle to the attainment of the objectives of the community. The second set of disruptors have to do with policy discontinuity, implementation inconsistencies, possibly inadequate coordination among those who are participant in the educational process, and of course a lack of readiness to be able to make changes. For example, a lack of readiness to get into technology. I think that the most threatening of the attainment of program objectives is really implementation inconsistencies, because if we as a nation are looking to excellent basic education, then we must be able to say that education programs in schools for children and the youth are implemented in the same quality level, using quality materials, and giving opportunities to all children as they need it. And of course, and it needs no introduction, the COVID-19 pandemic and similar health crisis, these are definitely obstacles and disruptors. Now, because of the recent or the 2 years of COVID-19 threatening our lives, the safety of people and communities, gaps in continuity in education have been noted. We all have experienced it. No? So the impact of obstacles and disruptors, with some focus on senior high school, will be the content of the next few slides. So first, gaps in program implementation have been massive. Whether it is in basic ed or higher education, it has really been massive. We went from classrooms such as this, face to face. Even if they're full and crowded, there is connection between teacher and student and teachers that we are all used to, and we shifted immediately to these modalities: remote, blended, modular, different ways of delivering the program had to be made immediately. TV, radio, internet, these were all used to the best of the abilities of teachers, of curriculum makers, everyone involved tried their best to adapt. No? And research has shown us that those who have access to technology and materials have had an edge during this time. And I think that this is a very crucial point because this is a gap um, that that has caused many children to fall through that crack. To fall, it's not even a crack anymore; it's a gap. To to fall through that gap because they have so little access or limited access, and they cannot partake of whatever the teachers and schools have been developing to the fullest. There are also gaps in access to programs. Um, Based on data from the DepEd, we know that enrollment has fallen from between the years of 2019 to 2020 to the school year 2020 to 2021. And in total of about 2.5 million children. And this is no small number in our country, in any country for that matter. And in particular, and I would like to emphasize that this drop was also seen in senior high school from a population of 3.192 million children in senior high school, both grades 11 and 12 in 2019. This dropped to 2.89 million in 2020. So we're actually missing about 250,000 students from senior high school. We also have information that there was a drop in the 2020-2021 enrollment in higher education. Unfortunately, there's no information in the website of CHED about 2020, 2021, but there have been reports that about 44,000 students did not enroll. The other gap in terms of access to programs that we must all take a look at is actually an existing gap. It's a gap between the number of schools offering senior high school and the number of institutions offering higher education. And so, for example, in total, there are 11,800 senior high schools in the country, but in total, there are only about 2,396 higher education institutions in the entire country. This does not count technical vocational institutions, however, and I believe that those have also a lot of students. But if we are thinking about continuity from basic ed to higher ed, or basic ed to technical ed, then we should be able to map how the graduates or how the schools are near each other or able to cater to the graduates of senior high school. And that, I think, is a crucial aspect of access to programs. When we try to bridge continuity, I think that we must address first things first. First, we must recognize and address pre-existing poverty and inequalities. That's the first thing we need to do because we cannot jump to a high-tech, fully technological intervention when we aren't able to make sure that students are safe from hunger, that students are free from dangers around them, and that they are living in communities that actually care for them. Another important point is the provision of libraries and multimedia materials and books to communities and schools. Access. And also strengthen infrastructure for access to the internet, technology, and digital tools. Another way is to remember that some disruptors are actually good. For example, technology and digital tools, um, data use, alternative processes of learning, personalized instruction, differentiated curriculum. These are all innovations that have been present for a very long time. I think that being able to respond and understand these disruptors then would have helped us now. And this is a key point in this discussion. I think that this is a takeaway we must all have so that we don't do it again, that we become more proactive, especially with what options are available. Another important aspect of continuity in education and learning is the understanding of how the levels of education interact or relate with each other. For example, basic education provides a foundation for both technical and higher education. But it also overlaps at a certain level with technical education, and technical education must overlap on many instances with higher education. Another is that there should be policy and program flexibilities. For example, flexible learning options. Um, in basic education, there are in-school, off-school programs, alternative learning systems. And in CHED, there is the expanded tertiary education and equivalency and accreditation program. And in TESDA, there is the recognition of prior knowledge and partnership between DepEd and TESDA, which is called the ALS Education and Skills Training and TVET sa ALS. So these flexible options for learners should be available and very importantly used now when we are constrained for space and time. Another one is an example here is the continuity of curriculum. If programs continue from grade school to college and beyond to technical ed, then you will be able to see the logic of having edukasyon pangtahanan at pangkabuhayan in the grade schools, and later on, continue that until ladderized education where CHED and TESDA actually interface. In this slide, I'd just like to emphasize and respond to the urbanization. If you look at this using data from NEDA, uh, you will find that the number of schools in rural communities, partially urban communities, and urban communities. And we can see here that majority are actually in the cusp of the two. And this means that a lot of our communities are in transition. And so the question is, are our schools also in transition? Are our schools being able to adapt to that? And again, as a matter of program implementation and continuity of access, we need to be able to make our schools responsive to the community. We also need to define public and private partnerships in education and learning. To be able to help families bring their children onwards from basic ed to university or higher ed or technical ed, there has to be voucher programs, education service contracting for alternative education. We have to support private education teachers and students because they've experienced such a massive hit during this pandemic. And finally, it's very important that we spend on education. We need to spend to provide every learner what he or she needs to be able to access these programs so that they can continue. In a study made by colleagues from Cebu, they found that the greatest stumbling block to education during this time of the pandemic is actually the lack of technology, the lack of skills among both teachers and students to use technology, and third, the lack of access to the internet. Fear of the health crisis is also a very important variable. So I'm sorry, I have to cut our discussion very short now. I'm over time as it is. Thank you very much for listening and participating in this forum.